Every company has a structure, its legal DNA. Some are open books. Others are puzzles built to hide the real players. In this lesson, we'll talk about entity risk, the characteristics of a company that tells you how transparent or how secretive it really is, and what makes an entity higher or lower risk from an AML perspective. We'll cover 4 key points: the legal form of the company, the date of incorporation, the entity's ownership and control, and the use of nominee shareholders or directors. By the end of this lesson, you'll know which factors to watch out for and why they matter in detecting financial crime. Legal form. What is a legal form? Simply put, it's the structure under which a company is registered, like a limited liability company, a partnership, a trust, or a foundation. The type of legal entity can significantly impact the risk profile. Why? Because some forms are more transparent than others. For example, publicly listed companies are usually lower risk. They're required to disclose who owns them, publish financial statements, and operate under strict oversight. That means it's much harder for someone to hide behind them. On the other hand, private limited companies, trusts, or foundations can be much more opaque. You might have shareholders or controllers who are hidden behind layers of paperwork. And then you've got special purpose vehicles, SPVs, and even some nonprofits. These aren't always high risk, but when their activities aren't clear or they're lightly regulated, they can create blind spots. That's exactly where criminals like to hide. Now on the screen, you can see the common legal forms and the explanations why they are risky or not. Pause the video if you need more time to review. Incorporation date. Let me ask you something. Which company would you say is more risky? A business that's been around for decades, with a solid history, no major issues, and a good reputation? Or a company that was established just last month, with unknown directors and no track record? This is exactly why the date of incorporation matters. It tells us how long a company has legally existed. Newly incorporated companies can sometimes be suspicious, especially if they immediately request high-value services or complex financial products. Criminals often set up fresh shell companies just to move money. On the flip side, very old companies aren't always low risk either. If a dormant company suddenly becomes active, or if it changes its business model overnight, that can be just as concerning. So the key takeaway is the age of an entity and how it uses its status can give you valuable clues about risk. Quick theory note: according to FATF Recommendation 10, ongoing due diligence should consider the nature and duration of the customer's relationship, including the company's operational history. Ownership. Here's a question for you. If you can't tell who actually owns or controls a company, how comfortable would you feel onboarding them? From a financial crime perspective, not knowing the ultimate beneficial owner is one of the biggest vulnerabilities. If ownership is unclear, there's a much higher chance the company could be used for money laundering, tax evasion, or even to hide sanctioned individuals. Ownership and control are at the heart of customer due diligence. We need to know the ultimate beneficial owner, or UBO, the real person who ultimately benefits from the company's activities. Criminals often hide behind complex structures, layers of holding companies, offshore entities, or even nominees. On paper, it might look like no single person is in charge, but that's usually by design. Let's break it down. A simple, local ownership structure is usually easier to verify and therefore lower risk. You can quickly see who owns the company and confirm their identity. But when you see multiple entities across different jurisdictions, especially in tax havens, that's when alarm bells should start ringing. These setups are often designed to obscure true ownership. And finally, trusts, foundations, or bearer shares can make it even harder to figure out who's really pulling the strings. These structures are legal in some places, but from an AML perspective, they raise significant red flags because they provide cover for anonymity. Here's a quick example. Imagine a consultant company incorporated in Cyprus. On paper, it looks legitimate. But when you check the ownership, you find 3 layers of holding companies, one in the British Virgin Islands, another in Panama, and the last in Liechtenstein. Each layer makes the real owner harder to identify. This kind of setup should immediately raise concerns and trigger enhanced due diligence. Nominee shareholders or directors. Nominee shareholders or directors are people who appear on paper as owners or managers, but act on behalf of someone else. This makes it harder to see who really controls the company, and that's a red flag from a money laundering perspective. While not always illegal, nominees increase opacity and raise risk. For example, if the same nominee directors are listed across dozens of offshore companies, it's a sign the true owners don't want to be identified. Theory note: FATF considers nominee arrangements a key risk factor for concealment of beneficial ownership. Institutions should request signed declarations identifying the natural person behind every nominee. So, to sum up entity risk, the legal form, the age of the company, its ownership and control, and the use of nominees all tell you how transparent or how opaque a business really is. The rule of thumb is simple. The harder it is to identify who's in charge, the higher the risk. Keep these factors in mind when you review a new client, and always ask yourself, do I clearly see who's behind this company, or is someone trying to stay hidden? A mini case study. A new client applies for onboarding. The limited liability company was incorporated last Friday in Estonia. The directors are based in Dubai. Ownership traces through Seychelles and Bermuda entities and then to UBOs in France. The business model? Consulting. Analyst notes. Recently incorporated. 4 layers of ownership. 4 different countries among which we see 2 offshore jurisdictions. That should scream to you complex ownership, entity risk high, and perhaps even final risk of the client high. 3 things to remember. Transparency equals trust. The simpler and more verifiable the structure, the lower the risk. Transparent ownership allows regulators, auditors, and institutions to clearly trace accountability, and that clarity is your strongest protection against misuse. Age tells a story. New, dormant, or suddenly active entities deserve extra scrutiny. A company's timeline often reveals its intent. Criminals create entities for speed and concealment, not for sustainable business. Hidden ownership equals hidden intent. Complex chains, nominees, and offshore layers are not sophistication, they're warning signs. When real control is buried under multiple jurisdictions, it's rarely for efficiency, it's to keep investigators guessing. Entity risk isn't just about collecting documents, it's about understanding why the company is structured the way it is.
If you found this lesson useful, you'll find the full Anti-Money Laundering Basics course linked below. It includes all stages, red flags, and practical exercises to help you build real compliance skills.